Welcome everyone to the final plenary session of the Angel Conference. And those of you who haven't met me so far, my name is Doug Bourn. I'm Professor of Education at UCL Institute of Education and been responsible for chairing aspects of this conference and also chair the advisory board of Angel. The plan for this final session is that we're going to have short inputs from Wegimont, from Massimiliano Tarozzi, and from Lydia Ruprecht from UNESCO. And I will then conclude the sessions with some few remarks about plans for going forward. So without any further ado, I'll ask Wegimont, Director of Global Education Network Europe, to say a few words, and then I'll pass on to Massimiliano.
Thank you, Doug, and great to see you all. Thanks for being here. And on behalf of Jean, as one of the co-founders of Angel, I think we have today to mark the fact and recognize the fact that Angel is growing wings, taking off, possibly even beginning to soar. The range of papers, the quality of many of the interventions, and the research on which they're based, I believe augurs well for the field. This is Jean's 20th year, and as we look back, we look forward. The French philosopher Paul Ricoeur, in a marvelous essay back in 1992 on the need for a new ethos in Europe, suggested that, along with the appreciation of plural readings of, well, just about everything, there's a need to constantly reimagine, to reinterpret the past, to reimagine transmitted transitions, so that we can recognize in the past what he describes as the hidden arrows of futurity contained in our readings of the past. He talks about the unfulfilled future of the past forming perhaps the richest part of our tradition. And if that's true in many things, it's particularly true in global education. And on Jean's 20th year, as we look back, we might suggest that 20 years ago, we may have had strong consensus regarding global education, but there was weakness of theoretical reflection, not enough dissensus, not enough space for schools of thought. There was a strong activist base 20 years ago, and while I don't want to appear to falsely dichotomize activism versus theory, we have wonderful examples of people here today that embody the best of both, but nevertheless, there may have been a little bit of an anti-theoretical culture. In some countries, there were small but growing communities of research, but in most there were not. And there was little recognition, with some exception, of the need for funding of research in global education. Now, 20 years later, I believe things have changed, and there are reasons to be cheerful without being over-optimistic. We see a deepening of thought of theoretical reflection, an embedding of global education concerns in larger and broader research communities and research conversations. We see growing engagement between researchers and practitioners, researchers and policymakers, and growing alignment regarding the issues that policymakers confront and that require research, along with the concerns of researchers. And we'll send something in the report of this about the concerns that policymakers have identified even recently during April that are, I believe, of crucial importance to researchers. So I would say, for me, there are two outstanding features of this Angel conference that inspire. One is that the philosophical basis of global education. I see threads of discussion and papers that are questioning the fundamental and foundational concepts or assumptions regarding epistemology, ontology, operative anthropology, pedagogy, etc. The second really impressive characteristic of the conference, I believe, is that while Jean is merely a European network, we see that Angel is now beginning to draw from different regions to develop a regional and global network. And we're both excited to be part of this and humbled to learn from our colleagues in the global south and from those excluded elsewhere. So thank you, Angel. And thanks to all in Angel for this. I'll come back to that in a moment. Finally, I just say that there are three questions that the conference may have addressed, but that I suspect have left us with more answers than questions. So this was about pedagogy in global education. But has there been enough robust and in-depth research into the most appropriate and learning effective pedagogies for global education? Or do we just walk behind banners like participant? The question. There is a clear focus in this conference and was on social justice. Are we clearer about the centrality of social justice, local and global, at the heart of pedagogy? And finally, regarding hope, I see signs of hope all around the field of global education, in practice, in policy, and in research. But it's not an uncontested term. Have we deepened our understanding of hope? Can we continue to? I believe we should, because as Paulo Freire once said, rather narkily, if you don't have hope, you really should get out of education. I'd say that's doubly true of global education. So thank you, Doug, as the chair of the Angel Board. Thank you to the other members of the Angel Board, Alina, Massimiliano, Annette, Anna, and Lasalette and Madalena, for the hope, the inspiration, and thanks to Kester and the teams in UCL and Jean for all the work, for the signs of hope. Thank you.
Thank you, Liam. Much appreciated. Thanks. I'm going to go straight on to Massimiliano.
Yes. So thank you, Doug. Thank you, Liam, for your words and for your support to Angel activities. Just few words, just at the end of this event, just to reminding the title we choose for this event, pedagogy. Is here, over here, pedagogy of hope and global social justice. Pedagogy of hope, following what Liam said. What a great Freirean title for a conference organized, hopefully, towards the end of a tragic pandemic, which we should remember that provoked 3.5 million deaths worldwide, and has had dramatic consequences on school population because of school closures and disruption. And we all know that this COVID crisis has exacerbating existing inequality, and its impact was particularly severe for most vulnerable and marginalized students. We all know that. So it's particularly good to think about hope in this particular moment. So to try to look at the future with hope. And this brings me to the second part of the title. So the inequality of the COVID impact. This brings me to the second part of the title, the global social justice, also echoing Freire, the social justice idea. From the very beginning, Angel endorsed a global social justice approach to global education and learning. I remember the inaugural conference in London 4 years ago, in 2017, the first conference. At that time, Angel was a tiny network, basically European, made up by European scholars and sponsored by European institutions. By the time, Angel has become more and more a global network. And this conference, I think that my feeling is that this conference has clearly demonstrated this change, this shift, based on the number of participants, the provenance of participants, the high quality of presentation coming from all over the world. When, as for the membership, Angel has more than 600 members coming from all over the world, from many different countries in the four corners of the world. I think that this conference in particular marks a precise change of pace, a substantial shift for our network. I think that is very important to stress at this moment. Therefore, after this conference, members will be asked to participate in a survey, will receive a survey asking them about the future activities. Which activities for early career researchers? Whether or not we want to create regional networks such as the Asia Pacific, which met this early morning, or the creation of thematic networks, or a kind of a spatial interest groups, as happen in other academic networks. All these kind of activities will be included in these surveys immediately after this conference. Of course, we are planning some activities, for example, the new edition of the Multilingual Digest. We are currently working on to release the 2021 version, including 2 more languages for a total of 8 languages. Then we will also improve the information and communication hub through the website, social media, and the YouTube channel, disseminating information, collecting and disseminating information on global education and learning. And definitely, we look forward to the next biannual international conference in 2023, hopefully face-to-face, but we'll see. Well, to conclude, after this very difficult time, we all should acknowledge how difficult it was, how stressful for all of us, for me, for sure. Therefore, I would like to thank you, sincerely thank you, all of you, for your active participation in this conference, because I know how stressful, how difficult it is to attend online conferences. But coming back to the title, the hope, to the idea of hope, to the title, is now time to think at the future with a sense for hope. We have discussed many times with my colleague and friends, Carlos Alberto Torres, about hope in education. We have different ideas on hope. Even if I like the way in which, especially Freire, in one of the latest work, The Pedagogy of Hope, conceptualize hope as an ontological need. To be honest, as an educator and researcher in education, following Gramsci, I can see the risk of endorsing a dreamed future with romantic idealism or empty utopianism. Well, I prefer to think of hope in a different way. I prefer to think of the future of our community in particular, beyond the COVID pandemic, with the Gramsci's optimism of the will, complemented with the pessimism of the intelligence as a concrete perspective to influence processes of social change.
Thank you, Massimiliano. I'd like finally to pass on to Lydia Ruprecht from UNESCO to say a few words on her reflections on the conference. Lydia.
Thank you very much, Doug. Dear network members and colleagues, thank you immensely for giving UNESCO the opportunity to say a few words on this occasion. It has genuinely been an inspiring moment to listen to the discussions and witness the dynamism of this growing and diverse, as many have just pointed out, community of researchers. In our current global context, challenged by too much, too little, and misinformation, we need more spaces, such as those offered by Angel, to ground our actions and policies in science and scientific inquiry. These spaces are fundamental to the work of researchers, but also for those who are less familiar with the trade, who labor to advance global citizenship education through policy dialogue and policy reform, program implementation, teaching, and training. These spaces of dialogue that you've created here allow those who are not in research to digest and give meaning to their experiences and intuitions. They help us connect the dots between theory and practice. They can spark new ideas and help us also confidently bury misconceptions or misconstructions that conflict with research. These moments are too few in our increasingly accelerating online pace of working. The pandemic has only stepped up the critical importance of these encounters and exchanges, as we are seeing countries legislate, regulate, and manage education systems in the dark in a completely unforeseen context, without the full body of evidence and experience to guide decisions. So my first concluding remark is to say thank you for your dedication, commitments, creativity, continued effort, which made it possible for us to meet in new ways today, despite this circumstance. I hope you will make full use of internet and all the platforms that we now have today to share the findings and the proposals exchanged during the conference to a wider audience, because the information that was shared, the knowledge that was developed for this purpose also now needs to travel. This gives me the opportunity to also inform you that we look forward to hosting the next Angel Conference at UNESCO in 2023, provided, of course, the circumstances will allow us to meet. And we do look forward to this moment. This next event may actually be the opportunity to explore even further and deeper what Liam has mentioned, but the connections between policy, research, and practice, which are really core. As highlighted by Carlos Torres, UNESCO Chair on Global Learning and Global Citizenship Education, We are indeed at a near existential turning point, one indeed where the field is open and ripe to shift paradigms. Last week in Berlin, as you know, UNESCO's World Conference on Education for Sustainable Development gathered close to 3,000 participants thanks to the online connections, including 80 governments that signed onto a declaration that has transformation at its core. The member states adhere to the declaration because they are fully aware that sustainable development will not happen without appropriate education and global citizenship education based on respect for human rights and democratic principles. And also, to heal from the crisis and restore societies, education has to transform. And I think we can find hope in these processes as well, involving governments. Transformative education is essential to restore the bonds that characterize our shared humanity and our relationship with the natural world. It is also what can help rebuild the bridges within and between our societies, fragmented and estranged by the crisis and a growing sense of fear. Independent of whether there is a discernible global rise and the nationalist perspective fueling these fears that thrive on this instability, and whether there will be one in the future, all manifestations of exclusionary nationalism, such as hate speech, violence, and discrimination, are encountered to the values of global citizenship education and pose an educational challenge. In this light, the conversation around global citizenship education has to continue in order to ensure that it remains relevant to our contemporary world, that it speaks to the challenges and threats to democracy, that it speaks to the real challenges and aspirations of ordinary people, of the people, and is shaped by the will and the communities to find collective solutions to their problems. It is on this condition that global citizenship education can deliver the type of transformations that are needed to build a more peaceful, just, and sustainable world, which underpins Target 4.7, Sustainable Development Goal. With this concern in mind, UNESCO launched a new strand of work exploring the linkages between education and culture, including arts and creativity. Now, this work is just starting, but we will have more to report on in 2022. But through this work, we hope to deepen the understandings of the transformational potential of global citizenship education to shape a more sustainable world. This is also the aim of another source of hope, which is UNESCO's Future of Education initiative that was launched 2 years ago before the onset of the pandemic. Now, it is founded in the principle of education as a human right and has canvassed widely to inform the work of UNESCO's international campaign led by the President of Ethiopia. I know that many of you have contributed substantially to this process, so I thank you very much for your contributions. Now, this initiative is framed in the plural, as you know, the futures of education, because indeed we face many possible futures. The report of the initiative, to be released in November this year, will be an agenda for global debate, exploration, dialogue, and action, an opportunity to look forward to identify policies and strategies towards the future we want and redress past injustices with hope and determination. Now, the red thread running through this exercise is what we are now calling learning to become, complementing Delors' 4 pillars of learning to be, to do, to know, and to live together. It is based on the premise that education has a regenerative or restorative role to play in healing from the crisis and charting a more inclusive and resilient future. So this is also my message of hope that I wish to convey to you and that I think we convey through global citizenship education and through all the work that was with us shared in the past few days. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lydia. Very much appreciated your comments on behalf of UNESCO, and also to thank you particularly for offering to host the next biannual conference of Angel in Paris in 2023. And we all look forward to seeing everyone there. What I'd like to say finally, in terms of bringing this together, is that we need to remind ourselves, I think several of you have already said so, that the context in which this conference has taken place. I think when we had the last conference, the sense in which we saw the threats of happening in terms of climate change and so on, and the fears there were about the impact of that and the sense of looking to the future. None of us could have anticipated the world we live in today from 2 years ago. And I think the sense in which the global education community and the people engaged in promoting global citizenship have become quite, I would say, quite important voices in some of those dialogues and discussions. And I just want to share one small example on where that's happened within my own context within England. And that there has been a lot of recent activity around how we put into practice the Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly 4.7 of the Sustainable Development Goals. There's been this initiative called Our Shared World, which is about bringing all these things together. And what's happened in the process of engaging over 100 organizations throughout England is that the conversation has moved from talking about how do we link global citizenship to sustainable development to human rights, to posing wider questions about the purpose of education. What is education for? And as Lydia just said, learning to become. People are starting to connect the themes that are in 4.7 and the Sustainable Development Goals for wider questions within education. And the challenge we then have, how do we then take those forward? I happen to unfortunately live in a country at the moment that actually has a policymakers who are not particularly sympathetic to some of these ideas, but there are other countries where there's already lots of these things are taking forward, as has been shown at this conference. And I think what I've found particularly the ways in which the perspectives of taking forward the themes of the Sustainable Development Goals and 4.7 are now becoming part of policies and practices in countries from East Asia to Sub-Saharan Africa to Latin America and across the world. And I think the sense in which how we as academics can respond to that is, I think, a real opportunity, but also a real challenge. As a number of people have said, both in this session and earlier sessions, that a lot of this area of practice relies historically on the work of hundreds of civil society organizations around the world. I became involved in moving from running an NGO to developing a research center in London on the basis that I found that there was a lots of excellent practice, but we were very unclear about what was the purpose of what we were doing, what was the evidence we have to support our ideas and our practices. And I think here we are, 15 years later, in a very different place. And the sense in which those discussions are now part of the academic community. The Global Education Digest that Angel produces now shows that there's several hundred publications that have global citizenship in its title that come out every year. They're now part of the common sense of lots of educational practice. But that also, because we're now part of that, people have greater, I think, expectations for us, greater hopes that our role and contribution can make. Therefore, I think we need to redouble our efforts. We need, I think, whilst continue to develop our network and to build the work of Angel, also to look at how we can build alliances and networks that broaden our appeal and engage far broader groupings of people. There's been a criticism, I think, historically of people involved in global education and global citizenship education to too often just talk to each other. Angel provides that space and opportunity which we need to continue to build on, but we also need to look outwards. And I think one of the things to me that the pandemic has shown is the extent to which the themes that have been part of our practice and ideas are now very much have to be at the forefront of lots of educational thinking in terms of going forward. So I think those are things we need to keep to remind ourselves about in terms of moving forward. And finally, I was saying that one of the other personal reasons I was particularly keen to have the theme of hope and social justice at the heart of this conference is I've been writing around this area a bit for the last year or so. And one of the things I've found is that it's an area that we need to bring much more to the forefront of thinking forward. There's a lot of interesting work that's been done around futures education and thinking about the future that's been reflected in some discussions around climate change education. We need, I think, under the umbrella of global education, to bring some of these debates more closely together. And I'm very hopeful and optimistic we can do so. So in terms of moving forward, I look forward to seeing everyone again in Paris in 2 years' time. But no doubt there'll be opportunities for meet and have dialogue in the interim periods. We're looking at what form of activities we organize in 2022, whether we think about just an event for the career researchers or whether we look at how to support initiatives in various regions around the world. These are conversations we want to have in the coming weeks and months. And we very much look forward to your comments on a survey we'll be sending out to everyone in coming weeks and months. So in conclusion, I'd like to thank you all for participating in this conference. I've been ending conferences a lot the past year about, remember, stay safe and look forward to seeing you soon. We need to continue to stay safe, but I'm sure we're now looking forward to the future in a much more positive light. And thank you all again, and see you all soon. Thank you.